You cheated on me. I got my revenge.
Ben paced around the room, his mind racing, unable to settle. The wedding day, supposed to be one of the happiest of his life, was anything but. He had been so focused on getting everything ready, making sure the ceremony went smoothly, but now he was frantically searching for something as simple as his boutonniere. The chaos of the day had caught up with him, and his nerves were on edge. His thoughts were jumbled. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but a lingering unease kept gnawing at him. Everything felt off. Leah, his bride, had been distant recently. The spark they once had seemed to have faded, replaced by something cold, something unspoken. He couldn't quite place his finger on it, but the thought of it hung heavily on him. It wasn't the day he had envisioned. He glanced around the room again, his eyes darting from the small items scattered across the table to the floor beneath it. "Where did I put it?" he groaned, frustration building. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the quiet room, and just as he was about to give up, something made him pause. He heard voices. They were faint at first, almost drowned out by the quiet hum of the house, but they grew clearer with every step he took toward the door. His heart began to beat faster, instinctively knowing something wasn't right. He slowed down, his breath catching in his throat as he crept closer. The voices were coming from just down the hall. Leah's voice broke through the silence. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending," she said, the words dripping with an emotion he couldn't place. Her tone was softer, but there was something in it that struck him deeply. Ben's stomach twisted. He had to force himself to stay silent, to stay hidden in the shadows. "You'll keep pretending as long as you need to, sweetheart," a man's voice responded smoothly, almost too calm. "We have to be patient. He's never going to suspect a thing. He's too caught up in his little fairy tale." Ben's heart skipped a beat. That voice, his blood ran cold. It was the priest, the man who was supposed to marry them today, the man who was supposed to be guiding them into holy matrimony. But instead, here he was, talking to Leah like this. Leah's voice was now quieter, almost shaky. "I know. I need it to be done." "You know what to do, baby," the priest continued, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You've played this game before. He's just another mark. He won't see it coming." Ben's breath caught in his chest. His worst fears were starting to take shape in front of him. "Once he's gone, it'll be all ours," the man said with a slight chuckle. "The house, the money, everything, you and me." Leah let out a heavy sigh, the sound of movement in the room following her words. "I just want it over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For good. So we can be together, without all the lies?" Ben's entire world seemed to collapse in on itself. He was suffocating. He had been blind, a fool. This wasn't just an affair. This was a betrayal that went deeper than he could have ever imagined. Leah wasn't just cheating on him. She had been planning to get rid of him for good. She had been using him, and now she was plotting to make him disappear. He wasn't a husband in her eyes. He was just another step in her game. He wanted to confront them, burst into the room and scream, but his body was frozen. He stood there listening, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The realization settled like a stone in his stomach. "You know," the man added with a sinister laugh, "once he's gone, it'll be just you and me. No more pretending. We can have everything we've always wanted." Ben's fists clenched at his sides, his body trembling with rage. But he stayed still, waiting, listening. He couldn't act on impulse. He had to be smart. When the voices died down, Ben slowly stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, but he forced himself to calm down. He couldn't confront them yet. He had to play his part. He had to act like nothing had changed. So he turned, walking back toward the ceremony, trying to keep his face neutral, his mind spinning with everything he had just learned. He reached the altar, his heart still racing. He stood beside Leah, trying to mask his anger, his disbelief. When the time came, he said yes, without a second thought. The priest smiled at him. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Ben didn't even look at Leah as he leaned in for the kiss. His eyes were focused on something far away, somewhere, anywhere but here. The kiss was hollow, mechanical, nothing like the moments he had dreamed of. The connection, the love, had all disappeared in an instant. As he stepped back, the weight of the situation hit him even harder. The ceremony was over, but the real battle was just beginning. When the time came for him to sign the marriage certificate, Ben's hand hovered over the paper. Instead of writing his name, he wrote a false one. He was playing the game now. He would take back control, one step at a time. Ben sat quietly at the grave of his first wife, Diana, the soft rustling of the leaves around him providing an eerie soundtrack to his solitude. The air felt heavy with grief, the weight of loss pressing on his chest as he stared at the cold, unyielding stone. He had loved her deeply, more profoundly than he ever thought he was capable of loving anyone. The memories of her smile, her laughter, the warmth of her touch, these were the things that still haunted him. They were the pieces of a life he thought would last forever, now scattered like dust in the wind. His fingers brushed lightly over the smooth surface of the gravestone, a ritual he had performed countless times. Each visit, each moment spent here, was a reminder of what he had lost. Diana had been his everything, his best friend, his confidant, the one person who truly understood him. Their years together had been a beautiful journey, filled with love, shared dreams, and promises of a future they would build side by side. But those dreams had been ripped away too soon. Illness had stolen her from him, leaving him adrift in a sea of despair. Ben closed his eyes for a moment, the memories flooding back, sharper than ever. He remembered the way Diana's eyes had sparkled when she talked about their future. He remembered the quiet nights they spent together, the world outside fading away as they shared their hopes and fears. They had a life full of potential, a love that seemed unbreakable. But then came the sickness, and with it, the slow, agonizing decline. Diana had fought so hard, but in the end, her battle was lost, and with her, part of Ben had died too. He sighed deeply, his chest tightening as the familiar ache returned. I thought I'd found love again, he whispered softly to the stone, his voice thick with emotion. I thought Leah would be the one to bring me peace, to fill that hole inside me. But now it feels like I was just chasing shadows. Ben's mind wandered to Leah, the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. She was everything he had thought he needed after losing Diana. Youthful, vibrant, full of energy. 15 years younger than him, Leah had made him feel alive again. She was everything he had hoped for. Attentive, caring, always there to meet his needs before he even knew he had them. For a moment, he had believed she was his second chance at happiness, that perhaps, just perhaps, he could love again. But now, the weight of betrayal crushed him. Leah's lies, her deceit, had shattered the fragile hope he dared to build. She was everything I thought I needed, Ben murmured, running his fingers over the gravestone, almost as if the past and present could collide in this simple act. She was kind, loving, attentive. She even got along so well with Melanie. I thought maybe this time it would be different. He paused, his mind replaying every moment he had spent with her, searching for the cracks he had been too blind to see. Had he been that desperate? Had he really been so eager to escape the pain of his past that he had failed to notice the warning signs, the red flags that had always been there? His heart clenched as the truth settled in. He had been fooled. In his need for companionship, for love, he had overlooked the truth. He had allowed Leah to deceive him, to weave a false reality, and now, here he was, once again lost, once again broken. He closed his eyes, feeling the sting of tears in his eyes. The wind picked up, the branches of the nearby trees swaying as if in response to his pain. I miss you, Diana. You were my heart, my home. The words felt raw, as if he were saying them for the first time. I thought I could love again. But maybe I just wanted someone to fill the emptiness. But now, it feels like I was chasing a dream that was never meant to be. Ben sat there for a long time, letting the silence envelop him. He wished he could go back to the simplicity of those days with Diana, the days when life had felt full of possibility, full of love. He wanted to believe that he could find peace again, but how could he, when everything had been shattered? His future, the future he had hoped to build with Leah, now seemed impossible. He had been blinded by his own desires, his own longing for happiness, and now he had lost everything once again. He wiped away a stray tear, his heart heavy in his chest. The world around him felt so much colder, so much darker. He had come here seeking solace, seeking closure, but instead, all he found was the crushing weight of his own grief. Ben sat there, lost in thought, the pain of the past threatening to overwhelm him. What had he done wrong? What had he missed? And most importantly, what would he do now? He couldn't undo what had happened, couldn't change the course of his life, but he knew one thing for sure. He would never let anyone deceive him again. He stood up slowly, his knees aching as he moved away from the grave. There was a finality in his step, a sense of determination that he hadn't felt in a long time. The past was gone, but the future, his future, was still his to shape. He would move forward, for Diana, for himself, for what was left of the life he had once dreamed of. And whatever came next, he would face it head on. Ben sat at the small kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of him like a maze he had to navigate. His fingers drummed anxiously on the edge of the wood. His mind was reeling, full of questions that had no answers. Yet, his suspicions had taken root, and now he needed proof. Proof that everything that had happened with Leah wasn't just a series of coincidences. He picked up his phone and dialed his friend Greg. They had known each other for years, and Ben trusted him more than anyone. Greg was a lawyer, sharp as a tack, and always able to dig into records and pull out what no one else could. The phone rang twice before Greg picked up. "Hey, Ben, what's up?" Greg's voice was warm, but Ben could hear the undercurrent of concern. They had talked a little since the wedding fiasco, but not about anything serious. "Greg," Ben said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his frustration was apparent, "I need you to dig into something for me. I need to know everything about Leah's past. I've got a bad feeling about her, and I can't shake it. I need to know her history." Greg paused for a moment, then sighed. "All right, I get it. You want everything. Records, marriages, divorces, anything. I'll start digging. It'll take me a couple of hours, but I'll have something for you." Ben's fingers curled into fists as he stared out the window, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "Thanks, Greg. I don't even know where to begin. It's all so messed up." "I'll be thorough," Greg replied. "Don't worry, I'll get back to you as soon as I've got the information." The line went dead, and Ben let out a slow breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The fact that he had to ask someone to investigate his wife's history felt wrong, but it was the only way to find the truth. And if there was one thing he was certain of, it was that he couldn't keep living in the dark. He needed answers. Hours passed in a blur. Ben tried to distract himself, but nothing could shake the gnawing suspicion eating away at him. Finally, his phone buzzed on the table. Greg's name appeared on the screen. Ben answered quickly. "Greg? What did you find?" "You weren't wrong, Ben." Greg's voice was cold, detached. "Leah's been married 5 times. The first marriage ended in a quick divorce. The second one, that guy died in a car accident. The third, well, he died of a sudden heart attack. The fourth..." Greg trailed off, and Ben could feel the tension on the other end of the line. "What happened with the fourth?" Ben's voice was sharp now, the blood in his veins running cold. "The fourth man. He didn't die, Ben. He's alive, but he's in a psychiatric hospital. I'm not sure of the details yet, but it looks like he went through some major trauma after they split. There are records of him being committed to a facility several months after the divorce. Ben, this is starting to look bad." Ben's hand trembled as he gripped the phone. He didn't know what to say at first. He had suspected that something wasn't right with Leah, but this was beyond what he'd imagined. So she's been married 5 times, and everyone except this one guy is dead. "And he's in a psychiatric hospital?" Ben's voice was tight with disbelief. "Yeah, I'm looking into more details, but it seems like a pattern. You're right to be worried. This doesn't look like coincidence. You need to know what happened with him, though. I'll dig deeper into that." Ben stood up, pacing the room. His mind was reeling. The pieces were starting to come together in a way that made his stomach churn. He had married into a nightmare. "Keep going, Greg. I need to know everything. I need to see what else she's hiding." "I'll keep you posted," Greg said. "I'll see what I can find about the psychiatric guy. This might not be over yet." Ben hung up the phone, his thoughts racing. He knew, deep down, that Leah was hiding something much bigger than he had ever imagined, and now, with this new information, the stakes had never been higher. The woman he had married wasn't just deceitful. She was dangerous. He walked over to the window, staring out into the dark night. This ends now, he whispered to himself. I won't let her destroy me like the others. The smell of antiseptic and the sterile, cold air hit Ben as he walked through the hospital corridors. The flickering lights above him cast eerie shadows along the walls, making everything feel more surreal. He had never been a fan of places like this, but today was different. He needed answers, and he was willing to face whatever he had to in order to get them. Ben's shoes echoed in the hallway as he approached the small office near the entrance. He'd made arrangements earlier to meet with the man who had been married to Leah before, who had, according to the records, ended up in this place. His mind raced with the possibilities of what he might learn. The door to the office opened with a low creak, and a nurse glanced up at Ben. Mr. Hamilton, we've been expecting you. She gestured for him to enter. Inside the room, a man sat in a simple chair, staring blankly out the window. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The man looked older than Ben had expected, his hair graying at the temples, his eyes hollow with the weight of years spent in this place. The nurse closed the door behind Ben and stepped aside, allowing him to approach the man. This is him, she said quietly, then left them alone. Ben cleared his throat, stepping closer to the man. I'm Ben. The man didn't immediately respond. After a long pause, his voice came out hoarse and shaky. I know who you are. He turned to face Ben, his eyes distant, almost lost. I've been waiting for someone like you to show up. Ben sat down across from him, the weight of the conversation ahead pressing down on him. I came here because I need to know what happened with Leah. You married her, right? And then ended up here. The man's eyes darkened at the mention of her name, his hands tightening in his lap. Leah. He shook his head, as if the very word left a bitter taste in his mouth. She's a black widow, Mr. Hamilton. She's not what she seems. I wasn't the first, and I won't be the last. Ben's heart skipped a beat at the words. What do you mean by black widow? The man leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. She's a predator. She waits for the right moment, then she takes everything. She's not just after love, she's after power, after money. She lures men in, makes them believe they're the one, but all along she's planning her next move. Ben felt a chill run down his spine as the man continued. After we married, I started noticing things, strange things. Little by little, I started to lose my mind. She had a way of wearing you down, manipulating you until you didn't even realize it. But I wasn't stupid. I started getting sick. I think she was poisoning me slowly at first. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. She wanted me gone, out of the picture, and she did it, Mr. Hamilton. She broke me. Ben felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The realization hit him like a hammer. She poisoned you? The man nodded slowly. Yes, but it wasn't just that. It was everything. She would do it little by little, day by day, and eventually I ended up here. She made sure I wouldn't be able to fight back. And once I was in the hospital, she took everything I had. Ben clenched his fists. So, you're saying she's been poisoning me too? The man looked him dead in the eye. If you're married to her, if you're still living under her roof, she's already got her hooks in you. She'll make sure you're weak enough to fall for whatever her game is. It's all a show, until you're trapped. Ben's mind was racing. The pieces were coming together in a way he hadn't anticipated. Leah had done this before. She had destroyed men, broken them, and then moved on to the next victim. But this time, he wouldn't be one of them. He wasn't going to let her win. So how did you survive? How did you get out? Ben asked, his voice steady now, despite the storm raging in his chest. The man's expression hardened, a flicker of something resembling strength returning to his eyes. I didn't get out. She put me here. But you can still do something about it. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't trust her. Ben stood up, his heart pounding. He wasn't going to let Leah destroy him the way she had destroyed this man. I won't. I'm going to expose her. I'll find the proof I need, and I'll make her pay for everything she's done. The man's eyes softened for a moment, and he gave Ben a small nod. You're the only one who can stop her now. But be careful, Mr. Hamilton. She's dangerous. You'll have to be just as smart as she is. Ben nodded, his resolve hardening. I will be. As he left the psychiatric hospital, his mind was racing. He wasn't going to wait around for Leah to make her next move. He was going to take control. He had to act fast. At home, he wasted no time. He began installing hidden cameras throughout the house, his mind focused and sharp. He was ready now. He had a plan, and this time, Leah wouldn't get away with it. The bedroom was dimly lit by the soft glow of the bedside lamp, casting gentle shadows across the room. Ben stood near the door, pretending to let his guard down as Leah walked toward him, her movements slow and deliberate. She had always been an expert at luring him in, and tonight she was no different. Leah smiled as she approached him, her fingers lightly brushing his chest. "You look so handsome tonight, Ben. I've missed this." "Missed us," she whispered, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Let's make tonight perfect." Ben, still playing along, let his eyes linger on her. "I've missed you too," he replied, his voice low but controlled. On the outside, he was the picture of affection, but inside his mind was sharp and calculating. Leah reached up to kiss him, her lips soft against his, but Ben didn't allow himself to be fully drawn in. "I think a little time apart will only make tonight better," he said, pretending to be consumed with desire. Leah, eager to get him alone, ran her fingers down his arm. "Of course," she breathed, stepping back slightly. "Why don't you take a quick shower and I'll be waiting for you?" Ben gave a nod, slowly walking towards the bathroom, glancing back at her with a hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He could feel her eyes on him as he closed the door behind him. But as soon as the sound of water running filled the room, his mind started working. "She doesn't know I've already seen it." As the sound of the water drowned out all other noise, Leah quickly moved to the small table beside the bed. Ben had been careful, setting up the cameras before he entered the room. He knew what she would try. He watched from the hidden feed, his eyes locked on the screen as Leah moved around the room. Leah poured the champagne into the glass, her fingers deliberately shaking it, as if she were savoring every movement. She looked at the glass with a smirk, knowing exactly what she was about to do. Then, with a practiced hand, she reached into her small purse and pulled out a tiny vial. Ben's eyes narrowed as he saw her pour the contents of the vial into the champagne, making sure the liquid dissolved completely. She didn't suspect a thing. Ben had already anticipated her move, and now he had the proof he needed. Leah placed the glass on the table, then moved to the bed, lying down and waiting for Ben to finish in the shower dot. She appeared calm, almost too calm, but Ben knew her game by now. He wasn't falling for it. Minutes later, Ben emerged from the shower, toweling off slowly. He kept his face neutral, but inside, he was already several steps ahead. He saw Leah's eager expression as she greeted him. "All ready for me?" she asked, her voice light, almost sing-song as she motioned to the champagne glass on the table. Ben smiled, but only just. "I'm ready," he said, walking toward the glass. But as he picked it up, his hand grazed the edge of the glass, subtly tipping it slightly. With the slightest of motions, he quietly tipped the champagne into another glass that he had prepared earlier, carefully set under the bed, out of Leah's sight. He exchanged the glasses, making sure not to leave any trace of the tampering. As he did, he noticed the glint of satisfaction in Leah's eyes. She had no idea that he was playing her game, not the other way around. He walked back to her, the champagne glass now filled with only air, giving her a knowing smile. "Cheers," he said, holding up the glass to her. She grinned, pleased with herself. "To us," she said, clinking her glass with his. Ben didn't drink yet. Instead, he let her sip from her glass first, watching intently for any sign of a change in her demeanor. She took a slow sip, her face glowing with satisfaction. Ben had no intention of getting caught, and it would be a while before she realized something was off. He took a careful sip from his glass, then set it down. "I think I need a little rest," he said, letting her believe he was just feeling a little more relaxed than usual. As she leaned in to kiss him again, he allowed it, just enough to keep up the illusion that everything was as it seemed. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the blinds, but Ben's mind was already on alert. He watched Leah as she entered the kitchen, a faint smile still lingering on her lips. She prepared a cup of coffee, just as she always did, Dot. But as she set it in front of him, he noticed something strange. Leah's hand was trembling as she added a spoonful of sugar to the cup. "Good morning," she said brightly, sliding into the chair opposite him. "I made you your coffee." Ben eyed the cup for a moment. "Thanks," he said, but he didn't touch it right away. Instead, he glanced at her, studying her every movement, watching for any subtle slip. Leah seemed impatient. "Is it good?" she asked, her eyes almost pleading, like she was waiting for his approval. Ben nodded, then, in a casual motion, He moved the coffee to the side and poured it into a different mug. Without taking a sip, he quietly emptied the contents of the new mug into another container. He glanced at the cup Leah had made, and he noticed her movements had become more erratic, her lips pressed together in anticipation. "What's wrong, Ben?" she asked, sounding almost too innocent. Ben gave her a forced smile. "Nothing." "Just not in the mood for coffee today," he replied, his voice smooth, calm. But inside, he was analyzing every moment, every gesture, like a chess player preparing for the final move. Ben moved quietly through the shadowed park, his steps muffled by the wet grass beneath his feet. He had been following Leah for the past few days, watching her every move, learning her routines, and now, as dusk settled in, he had a feeling tonight might give him the answers he was looking for. He crouched behind a tall hedge, keeping a low profile. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of the secluded area near the park bench, where Leah was sitting, looking over her shoulder nervously. Ben's heart beat faster. He had seen her do this before, meeting someone under the guise of an innocent chat, but he wasn't buying it anymore. Minutes passed, and then he saw her, Melanie, his daughter. Ben felt a chill creep down his spine as she approached, her casual walk a stark contrast to the unease Ben was feeling. Melanie stopped a few feet from Leah, and the two women exchanged a quick, knowing glance. They didn't seem surprised to see each other, no apprehension, no awkwardness, just the quiet efficiency of two conspirators meeting in secret. Ben's breath caught in his throat. He watched as Leah reached into her purse and pulled out a small vial. It looked harmless, just an ordinary vial, but Ben knew better by now. His instincts told him it was the same kind of substance she had been slipping into his drinks. Leah handed the vial to Melanie, who took it with barely a pause. "Is it enough?" Melanie asked, her voice low but steady. Ben's eyes narrowed, his chest tightening as he realized that his daughter wasn't asking about a medicine or a harmless substance. She was talking about poison. "It's enough." "He'll be out of the picture soon," Leah replied, her tone cold and matter-of-fact. "I'll take care of it. We just need to be patient a little longer." Ben clenched his fists, his pulse racing. "Out of the picture?" His thoughts swirled as he pieced together the truth, one horrible shard at a time. They were talking about him. Leah and Melanie, his own daughter, were conspiring together to take him down. Melanie hesitated for a moment, looking over her shoulder. "Are you sure he's getting weaker?" she asked. "He's been looking better lately. I don't want this to backfire on us." Leah's response was firm, her confidence unwavering. "Don't worry. He's too arrogant to notice what we're doing. And we've got the time. He trusts me. And he trusts you, Melanie. He won't see it coming." Ben's mind reeled. Melanie, his own flesh and blood, was involved in this. She had been the one who always seemed so innocent, so kind to him. Yet here she was, working with Leah to kill him. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the hedge tightly to steady himself. Melanie handed the vial back to Leah with a small, satisfied smile. "You're right. He never suspected me. I've kept him in the dark about everything, just like you said." Leah smirked, tucking the vial back into her purse. "Good. Keep it that way. Once he's gone, it'll all be ours. The money, the property, everything." Ben's thoughts raced as the cold reality of the situation sank in. Everything he had worked for, everything he had trusted was at risk. Melanie had been complicit the whole time, and Leah was the mastermind, the one pulling all the strings. The two women exchanged another glance, the kind that spoke volumes, full of promises and plans for the future. "We'll be free," Melanie said, her voice quiet but filled with conviction. "He'll never know what hit him." Leah nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Now go. I'll handle the rest." Melanie turned and walked away, her head held high, oblivious to the weight of the betrayal she had just confirmed. Leah watched her go for a moment, then turned and began walking in the opposite direction, heading back toward the house. Ben waited, letting the sound of their footsteps fade before he exhaled, his breath shaky. His mind was reeling, but there was no time to waste. He needed to confront this, to make sure that the conspiracy was exposed. But the most painful part of all was the realization that he couldn't trust the two people he loved the most. His daughter and his wife were in on it together. Ben sat at his desk, staring at the screen in front of him, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping the edge of his coffee cup. It was a slow day at the office, but his mind wasn't on the work in front of him. He had his eyes on something far more important. the cameras he'd set up around the house. The small monitor to his right displayed the live feed from his home. Ben's heart raced as he clicked on the file he'd been waiting for. It was one of the many video recordings he had set up to keep track of Leah's actions. Today, like so many others, he had seen her leave the house. But now, he was watching her again, this time in the living room with him. "What's going on here?" Ben muttered under his breath as he leaned forward. The feed was clear. There she was, Leah, dressed in her usual tight dress, laughing at something a man in a black suit said. He was familiar, but Ben couldn't quite place him. It didn't take long for him to realize who it was, the so-called priest. Leah had been seeing him for weeks now, and Ben knew exactly what they were doing. What was worse, he had already witnessed this exact same scenario several times before. But this time, he was determined to keep a record. "You're not getting away with this," Ben whispered to himself, hitting the record button. He had already saved several similar clips, but today, he would make sure this one was crystal clear. On the screen, the two of them were talking in hushed voices, and it didn't take long before their behavior changed. Leah leaned forward, her hand on the man's chest. Ben could almost hear their voices through the screen, but the audio was faint. "You know I can't wait much longer," Leah purred, her voice filled with desire. Ben gritted his teeth as he saw the man lean closer, a smirk playing on his lips. "We have all the time in the world," he replied, his voice low and filled with a mocking tone that made Ben's blood boil. As the man moved closer, Leah kissed him, and Ben's stomach turned. "You're not a priest," he muttered to himself as he recorded the moment. This was all the proof he needed. He had enough to take her down now. Ben didn't stop the recording immediately. He let it play, taking in every detail, making sure he had enough footage to confront her later. His heart ached as the scene played out, but he couldn't afford to let his emotions get the better of him. Not now. Once the video was saved, Ben sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, his thoughts racing. He had all the evidence he needed. Now it was time to act. That night, as the evening wore on, Ben could feel the familiar weight of tension settling over him. He had already set the stage for his next move. He'd made sure Leah would be with him tonight, and he planned to take full advantage of her usual tricks. He walked into the living room, acting as if everything was normal. Leah, looking unsuspecting, greeted him with a soft smile. "How was your day, darling?" she asked, her voice sweet but hollow. Ben smiled back, giving her a curt nod. "Fine," he said, but his eyes were cold. Inside, he was already preparing for the next phase of his plan. He had to get her to act. Leah turned to make some tea, but Ben could feel the tension rising. He needed to make her think he was vulnerable. So, with a deep breath, he suddenly staggered, clutching his chest. He made a show of wincing, gasping for air, just enough to make it seem like he was in pain. "Ben!" Leah exclaimed, rushing to his side. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Ben put on an act, his voice hoarse. "I don't feel right," he whispered. He could see the concern in her eyes, and he knew she was already trying to play the role of the loving wife. She wasn't as good as she thought. Ben let his body sag a bit, as if he were on the verge of collapsing. Leah helped him to the couch, looking frantic, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to make him comfortable. But Ben wasn't really sick. He was playing his part. He had one goal in mind, to see how she would react. To see if her guilt would finally surface. "You need to lie down," Leah said, her voice panicked but with an edge of relief. She was thinking, calculating. She knew how to handle the situation. Ben nodded weakly, allowing her to lead him to the bedroom, where he settled into the bed, pretending to feel worse than he actually did. "I'll call the doctor," she said, disappearing out of the room to grab her phone. Ben, now alone, reached for the hidden camera remote control in his pocket. He pressed the button, ensuring the cameras he had set up earlier were recording everything. Tonight was going to be the night he exposed her. As the night wore on, the game was set. Ben had her right where he wanted her. He'd already set the trap. Now all he needed was for her to make the next move, and she would. Ben's heart was pounding as he stepped out of the car and onto the hospital parking lot. His mind was racing with all the evidence he had gathered. Every step of his plan had led him to this moment. Leah and Melanie were with him, their faces painted with false concern, but Ben could see through it. He was done playing their game. He walked through the entrance, his pulse quickening with each step. "Are you okay?" Leah asked, her voice just the right amount of worry mixed with calculated calm. I'm fine, Ben replied curtly, his tone colder than he felt. He was done pretending. It was time to end this. Inside, Ben motioned for Leah and Melanie to sit down in the waiting area. The hospital was buzzing with activity, but for Ben, it felt eerily silent. He stood for a moment, the quiet tension building, before turning to face the two women. I think it's time to finally be honest, he said quietly, though his words carried weight. Leah blinked, glancing at Melanie, who had been unusually quiet all day. What do you mean? Leah asked, her voice trembling slightly. What are you talking about? Ben didn't answer right away. He just pulled out his phone, scrolling to the footage he had saved. The footage of Leah poisoning him, the footage of their conversations, and every moment of betrayal he had documented. He wasn't going to back down. With a controlled, almost cold demeanor, he turned to the front desk, calmly asking for the police. I need you to send an officer down here, he said to the receptionist. I'm reporting a crime. Leah's eyes widened, and she took a step forward. What crime? She asked, her voice now edged with panic. You and my daughter tried to kill me, Ben said flatly, his eyes locked on her. The weight of his words hung in the air like a suffocating fog. You've been poisoning me, just like you did to your previous husbands. Melanie's eyes widened, and she immediately stood up. Ben, what the hell are you talking about? She asked, her voice shaking. But Ben was ready. He had anticipated this. As soon as the officer arrived, he handed over all the evidence, every bottle, every sample he had been collecting for weeks. He had everything, the food, the drinks, the various items Leah had used to drug him. These will be tested, Ben said, his voice calm. This is what you've been using to poison me? The officer took the samples from Ben, his eyes glancing at Leah and Melanie, who were now both standing in the middle of the waiting area, clearly on edge. The truth was coming out, and they could see that Ben wasn't bluffing. Leah turned on Melanie, her voice frantic. You can't be serious. You don't really believe this, do you? But before Melanie could answer, the officer turned back to them. Ladies, you're under arrest for attempted murder, he said. The words hit like a ton of bricks. Leah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She could only watch as the officer placed her hands behind her back and cuffed her. Melanie, too, was handcuffed, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. This is insane! I didn't do anything! She screamed, but the officer wasn't moved. Ben stood there, silent and motionless, as the officer led them both toward the back of the hospital to be processed. He watched as they were escorted away, the weight of everything finally beginning to settle in. But he wasn't done. Not yet. Leah! He called, just before she was fully out of the room. She turned, a venomous look on her face. I know who your partner is. I know who's been helping you. That priest, Sally. Her face twisted in a mix of fear and anger. You don't know anything, she hissed. You'll never prove it. Ben didn't flinch. He had what he needed. We'll see about that. As the officer left the room, Ben sat back down in the sterile waiting area, his heart still pounding in his chest. The truth is out, he thought to himself. But even though the immediate danger was over, there was still a sense of unfinished business lingering. Later, it was revealed that the man who had been assisting Leah had fled. Ben's investigator discovered that the man had disappeared without a trace. He's gone, Ben muttered to himself. But even though the man was elusive, Ben wasn't done. Not yet. He would find him. He would make sure everyone who had wronged him would pay for what they'd done. Ben had been watching Sally from the shadows for days, following him from one place to another. Today was the day. He knew Sally would be in the diner, just like every other afternoon. He waited outside until he saw him walk in, then followed behind, slipping inside just before the door closed. Sally sat alone at a booth, his back to the door, reading a newspaper. Ben approached without hesitation. Sally, Ben said flatly as he slid into the seat across from him, his voice calm but laced with menace. Sally looked up slowly, pretending surprise, but his eyes quickly flicked with a mix of wariness and something deeper, something Ben couldn't quite read. Well, if it isn't the man of the hour. He set down his paper, his hand momentarily resting on the table. I thought you'd be hiding somewhere, hoping this would all blow over, Ben said, his voice steady. Sally leaned back in the booth, smirking. I'm not running from you, Ben. What's the point? You think you can scare me into silence? I've got nothing to hide. Ben didn't respond immediately. He just stared at him, letting the silence build. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small vial, placing it gently onto the table, letting the liquid inside catch the dim light of the diner. Sally's gaze darted toward the vial and then back at Ben, a flash of unease crossing his face before he caught himself. "What's this?" Sally's voice was calm, but the flicker of fear was hard to mask. "It's your poison," Ben replied casually, watching him closely. "I've been feeding you small doses for a while now, Sally. You didn't notice? Thought you were just having a good time?" Sally's eyes widened in horror. He quickly pulled back from the table, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ben leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "I've been watching. I know everything. You've been helping Leia. You've been working together to destroy people's lives, and now it's your turn." Sally stood up, his face going pale. "You're insane." Ben didn't flinch. "You know what happens next. I've already made sure the police are on their way." "You're done." Sally's eyes darted nervously toward the exit, but Ben was already one step ahead. "You're not going anywhere." As soon as Sally started to make a move, Ben calmly pulled out his phone and dialed the police. He spoke with a cold, unwavering confidence, making sure to make the arrest official. Within minutes, the sirens were heard approaching. The diner was beginning to fill with murmurs and curious glances, and Ben smiled to himself, feeling a sense of control as Sally paced nervously, realizing his fate was sealed. When the officers arrived and made the arrest, Ben was right there, silently watching, as Sally was handcuffed and taken away. The police led him out of the diner, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and dread. As the officers were about to open the car door, Ben stepped forward, his voice low and calm. "By the way, Sally," he said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous calm, "there was never any poison." Sally froze, his eyes wide in disbelief. "What? You were bluffing." Ben nodded slowly, his lips curling into a small, victorious smirk. "You were too easy to manipulate. I never poisoned you." "But you were already caught." Sally opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat as the officers began to push him into the back of the car. The realization was clear. He'd been played, and Ben was going to make sure he paid for everything. Ben stood still for a moment, watching as the car drove away with Sally inside. He exhaled, his chest feeling lighter. As the night settled, he could only think about what came next. The war wasn't over yet, but today, Ben had won a crucial battle. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The room fell silent as the judge's gavel struck the wooden block, signaling the beginning of the final moments in the trial of Leia and Melanie. The weight of the proceedings bore down on everyone in the room, but no one more so than Ben, who sat at the front, his eyes never leaving the two women. Leia and Melanie were seated at the defendant's table, their faces a mask of defiance and anger. But Ben could see the fear lurking just beneath the surface. He knew they had lost, and this moment was just the final curtain on their scheme. He had won. The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence, detailing the charges once again: attempted murder, conspiracy, and a long list of crimes related to their elaborate plot. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was no way out for them. Leia's smug expression faltered as the guilty verdicts were read aloud. The judge's voice was steady and final. "Leia and Melanie Hamilton, you have been found guilty of all charges. You are hereby sentenced to serve time in prison for your crimes." The room erupted into murmurs, but Leia's voice cut through them like a knife. "I'll get everything back! You'll see, Ben!" she shouted, her eyes burning with rage. "Even if you think you've won now, when the divorce comes, I'll take everything from you. All of it." Ben's jaw tightened as he stood up, his voice cold and deliberate as he addressed the court. "Actually, Leia, you're wrong," he said, his words cutting through her fury like a sharp blade. "This whole thing was a sham. You're not even entitled to anything." Leia's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "What do you mean? The divorce? Everything's already in motion. You can't just take that away from me." Ben stepped forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "The marriage isn't valid, Leia," he stated calmly. "You think you're entitled to anything, but you're wrong. I didn't sign the marriage certificate. The signature on it wasn't mine." A sharp silence followed his words. Leia's face went white for a split second. Then her anger flared up even more, her hands gripping the table in front of her, knuckles white with fury. "You're lying!" Leia shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't do this to me! I deserve it all!" All of it. You can't take my money. Ben didn't flinch. He had prepared for this moment for months. I'm not lying, Leia. You've been playing this game for too long. Now it's my turn. Leia, overcome with rage, stood up suddenly, knocking over her chair in the process. She stormed toward Ben, her hands reaching out to grab him, her fingers trembling with fury. You can't get away with this, she screamed, her voice venomous. She lunged at him, hands grabbing at the lapels of his suit jacket, her nails digging into the fabric as if she could tear it off him in a fit of anger. The courtroom gasped, and the guards were immediately on their feet, rushing forward to restrain her. Leia's fury was palpable. She fought back against the guards, her arms flailing as she struggled to reach Ben. I'll make sure you pay for this, she yelled, her face contorted in rage as she pulled at his jacket with all her strength. In an instant, the guards had her, pulling her off Ben with force, but Leia wasn't done. She thrashed and kicked, her wild eyes filled with hatred, until one of the guards used a taser to subdue her. The crackling sound of the taser filled the room, and Leia's body jerked, her movements freezing as she collapsed into the arms of the guards. She let out a strangled cry, still trembling, as the electricity coursed through her body, causing her to lose her strength. They held her tightly, making sure she didn't go anywhere. Ben stood there, watching her with a cold, unwavering expression. It's over, Leia, you lost, he said, his voice low and steady. His words were a final blow, sealing her fate in the eyes of the court. Leia, now completely restrained, glared at him with venom in her eyes. You think this is over? You can't hide from me, Ben. I'll find a way to destroy you. But Ben didn't respond. He turned away from her, walking back to his seat, the room still filled with the hum of tension. The guards led Leia away, her struggles growing weaker with each step. Melanie sat silently next to her, her face pale, realizing too late that the game was up. As the trial concluded and the room slowly emptied, Ben stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. He had won, not just in court, but in life. He had outsmarted them, and now justice was finally served. Ben sat quietly at his wife's grave, his hand resting on the cool stone, the weight of the past few months heavy on his heart. The cemetery was peaceful, the soft hum of nature around him only accentuating the silence in his mind. He stared at the inscription on the gravestone, tracing the familiar letters with his fingers. You never got to meet our granddaughter, Diane, he murmured to the wind as though speaking to his late wife. But you'd have loved her. You would have spoiled her, just like you spoiled Melanie when she was little. His voice caught slightly, and he paused, letting out a slow breath before continuing. I never thought I'd be here like this, talking to you alone, after everything that's happened. Ben looked down, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the gravestone. The pain of losing Diane had never truly gone away, but now the pain of betrayal from his daughter Melanie felt like an even heavier burden. I never saw it coming, Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. I thought I had finally found peace with Leia. She was everything I thought I needed, everything I thought I wanted. He shook his head, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface, mixing with the sorrow. But Melanie, I never imagined she would be part of it, part of the lie, part of everything that nearly destroyed me. Ben stood up, stepping away from the gravestone, his gaze softening as he looked down at the flowers he had placed there earlier. He thought about his daughter and what she had become, how she'd deceived him, how she had played her part in Leia's game. But despite it all, there's still a chance for redemption. For both of us. He turned, his steps slow, steady as he made his way back to his car. His thoughts drifted to Melanie's situation, the years she would have to spend in prison to atone for what she had done. He had been angry with her, yes, but there was something deeper, something more painful about seeing his own flesh and blood, his own daughter, go down the path she had chosen. I will raise the baby, Melanie, the way I should have raised you. I'll make sure they know what love really is, what family really means. He spoke with conviction, knowing that this was his way of finally fixing what had gone wrong in his life. As he reached the car, Ben felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. And raising his granddaughter, his grandson, he thought with a slight smile, would be the start of a new chapter for him, for them. You'll grow up surrounded by love, no matter what happens, no matter what Melanie did, he said under his breath. I'll make sure of it. Ben climbed into the car, glancing back at the grave one last time, before pulling away from the cemetery, the weight of his decision settling in.